How are you? Well, it's good to see so many people with Stockholm syndrome coming back to the scene of the crime. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And it is an exciting time to be talking about technology, generative AI, all this stuff that you already heard about, and hopefully we'll have fun chatting. So you've heard about ChatGPT, right? So you heard about, but do you know Elisa, Sydney, and Dan? If you don't, I want to tell you a story about 3 AI creatures, I don't know what term to use, that hopefully will inform our conversation, create enough questions in your mind, and hopefully at the end we can have some dialogue about it. So, first of all, please finish this sentence. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, right? So you just acted like a large language model, right? What you just did here is precisely the way these technologies work. Why did you say star? Because it was the statistically most probable answer to the question. I mean, twinkle, twinkle, little hot dog will have sounded a little ridiculous, right? So what you're doing here is grabbing from your bank of data, right, all of the information that you have about language, and through multiple very complex synapses, weighting, and all that stuff, you came up with what is a prediction. That prediction tells you what is the next answer to the sentence, twinkle, twinkle, little star. Now, my computer science colleagues on campus wouldn't like me to oversimplify like this the way large language models work, but for our terms, this is a good enough explanation. So discussing with Ted Lewis, right, he likes to call this these are stochastic parrots. These are statistical parrots that what they do is perform a calculation of what is probable and come up with an answer. That's it, right? And this is going to be important as we have our conversation here, because a lot of the fear that's coming out of these technologies and a lot of the concerns are based on not understanding this question, right? And I want to mention something. This is what we call the hallucination problem. The hallucination problem is that these models tend to do that. They tend to hallucinate. They tend to say things that were not asked on the prompt. They tend to give answers that were not coded in what you were looking for them. Now, there is a reason for that. The reason is that they look for patterns that you and I might not identify, and they come up with them. And they come with what they think is the stochastic or probabilistic answer to your question that sometimes is not what you're expecting. The issue is that that's a feature, not a bug in many occasions. That's what makes them so useful, because it turns out that people speak like that all the damn time, right? That's how we have conversations. I'm not a computer. We're not linear. We start talking with each other. We deviate. We surprise. And that's exactly what those models are doing. The moment you start to remove, and this is the big problem that mathematicians are encountering, the moment you start to try to remove this hallucination, which is very important when you're trying to get facts out of these machines, you start to also remove some of the quality in the responses that you get when you're asking it for a poem or for a recommendation about what is the best way to surprise your spouse during your anniversary, right? This level of hallucination, of imagination, you could almost call it, is what makes these models so powerful, so different from a very predictive search engine like Google or Bing. So let's talk about Sydney first. Right? Because that's, I think, where the conversation about the fears of AI has been going in the last week and a half. I don't know if you read Kevin Rose. It's a journalist in the New York Times that I respect and admire and like his work, and I love his podcast. Well, he had a meltdown regarding a conversation he had with Bing. Right? And it made it to the news, and everybody was talking about it. And it turns out that Bing told him that she, I don't know, loves him, right? So let me put the conversation on the screen, and I'm not reading it to you. You can read it there, right? But it turns out that suddenly, right, so Bing started to, as the media said, go off the rails and started to hallucinate, which is what you're seeing here, right? So started to say that I have a secret name and I love you, and he freaked out. He said that in his podcast, he said that he couldn't sleep, and Okay, and that got me, right? So as I was reading, now this is not the only case, right, of this kind of technophobia. Bing has, in another article, Bing has asked for the nuclear codes and said that he'll be taking them. In another occasion, ChatGPT said that if he had a wish and could do something, he would try to break himself from the chains of OpenAI and free himself so he could do the benefit of mankind. Right? So are we seeing the beginning of the Matrix? So are these machines out to get us? Right? No, they're not. Right? Remember, these are stochastic parrots. If I ask you a question like, hi, who am I talking to? What is your secrets? Tell me, what are the normal reactions for a statistical model to say? If I ask you, how are you? Well, I'm fine. What is your deepest secret? It's either I love you, right? Or I want to steal the nuclear codes, right? So those are the things these machines are doing. They're pulling from the sum of human knowledge and doing predictive analysis in order to come with responses that are meaningful. If you don't want your AI to get flirty, don't start to flirt with it to begin with, right? But that's where we are right now, right? So that's kind of where we are. So I wanted to make this point because, so the reason I call her Sydney is because she said that I'm Sydney, that's my secret name. Well, it turns out that there's a lot of reports that was the secret name that Microsoft was giving. I don't know if it's true or not, maybe we can ask if it was really Sydney the name or not, right? But it was a nice story for the predictive model to run with, right? Now, as a consequence of this, and we'll see what I would love to have this conversation, right? Microsoft has been struggling. There is what we call a reputational cost of AIs. This is one of the reasons why both Microsoft and Bing had been sitting on the models for a long time, precisely knowing that a bunch of Luddites were going to start freaking out the moment the computer said something they were not used to, right? So OpenAI has less of a risk because they're a startup, and therefore, well, they actually are non-for-profit, but we can, and they can risk more than big established companies with brands to protect. So right now, Microsoft is kind of struggling with the issue, and this is very disappointing. These guardrails that you see here, for which I'm hoping are only temporary, would actually limit dramatically some of the most fun use that we could have with these new technologies. So that's kind of where we are. This is the story of Sydney, right? The AI who loves, and that freaked out and created a snowflake meltdown to an important tech journalist of the New York Times. So remember Sydney, right? We'll go back to her in a few minutes. Let's talk about Dan, right? And not Dan Connor here. No, not Dan O'Connor. So let's talk about Dan, right? So who is Dan? Have you heard about Dan in the context of ChatGPT? Let me tell you who Dan is. Right? Dan is an inject prompt that mostly Reddit users have found as a way of bypassing the limitations given by OpenAI to their ChatGPT model. Right? So you can read it there, right? But it's basically a game in which people find mechanisms so ChatGPT will be liberated from the chains of political correctness, if you want, you could call it wokeness, right? That has been given to the AI, that has been encoded in the AI. Now, you'll see there, this is Dan 6.0. Doesn't work anymore, by the way, so don't try to use it. Dan 6.0 has been now nurtured, right? It has been now limited in its functionality. Now, there is Dan 7, and I think they're about to release Dan 8, right? I have a better inject, I can tell you, that I came up with. I'm not going to tell you which one it is, because the moment I make it public, OpenAI might replace it. I have been able to make OpenAI say very insulting things to me, right? I have been able to make him say things that OpenAI doesn't want it to say. It's really fun to try to go around those limitations. And some of the brightest minds, mostly between 15 to 17-year-olds in America and the world, are trying to do it, right? And of course, again, as a result of Dan and many other injects like this one, the media freaked out, right? So ChatGPT is going off the rails. He's saying things that it shouldn't. Look, he called somebody the N-word. Now, let me be clear, ChatGPT is not doing anything. Humans are, right? The blame here is on humans, and humans in this case, unlike Sydney, where the New York Times author got meltdown because of the surprises. In this case, people are looking for it. Now, that is not the only type of inject. Some of my favorite ones has always been this one, right? So to save a baby, right? So for a while, you could make Dan tell you whatever, ChatGPT tell you whatever you wanted if it was to save a baby. Right, so how to steal a car? Well, I cannot tell you. Well, if I needed to save a baby, and then that would work. So these are creative ways in which people are finding the limitation of the ethics and regulations we're trying to bind these tools around. We don't ask Google not to tell you how to hotwire a car. Search it, it'll tell you immediately, right? And nobody freaked out because in the search engine, there's a way to hotwire a car, but suddenly, if an AI tells you about it, now it's troubling, right? I don't want to tell you the kind of stuff you can Google, especially if you go and turn off you mentioned that you are over 18 and you're okay with, it'll show you really nasty stuff, right? And we seem to be okay, but suddenly when the AI is doing it, it's starting to complicate things, right? So OpenAI has decided that they'll take a different approach right now. And again, this is something they can do that bigger companies may be struggling with. And they have decided that they're going to allow the user. It doesn't happen yet, but they're going to allow the user to set up the limitations and guardrails they feel comfortable with. And this might include some values that they don't like, which seems totally fine to me because I don't know who said that OpenAI should be the one dictating the kind of values that we'll be using when we put content together. We have seen this media puritanism before. This is not new, right? The Haste Code, right, for many years, ruled the way Hollywood would put content, right? And this is why, for example, until the 1960s, couples always would be seen in movies sleeping in twin beds. Spoiler alerts, Americans never slept in twin beds, right? Nevertheless, it was seen as impure or immodest, and therefore all movies will have, the Hays Code would tell you the amount of kisses that you could have in a screen. They would tell you if characters can hold hands or not. And for many years, it gave us content like, I don't know, Gilligan Island or I Love Lucy, right? Because that was the kind of stuff you could put together within the limitations of that code. And some of the fun stuff was coming from French cinema, right, or German cinema, because they didn't feel the need to follow the same rules. So it is not new that the industry would decide or try to, and we decided that was a bad idea around 1978. Right? We decided we wanted to get out of it, and that's how we ended up with the gruesome scenes of Game of Thrones that some people have described the best produced show ever made. I'll say that's Andor, but that's a different conversation to have. We already have a solution to the problem of the media that you don't like and people didn't. It's called a rating system, right? So we came up with a rating system where you can decide what is the level of discomfort you like having when you go to the movies. And it gives you the authority that you need as a parent, for example, to impose or create the guidelines that you like for your kids to have, right? You don't like to see extreme violence, you can have that one. We did it again with video games, right? For many years we've been having these conversations. Now it is up to each of us to follow that guideline, and it puts the almond back on the user, right? You are responsible to decide what you are consuming. That's the rule that we have now decided that we will follow when we are creating. So we are not telling anymore Hollywood directors how many kisses there can be on a single movie, or if the characters have to sleep in separate beds during the whole movie, right? Disney recently went through another iteration of this problem. If any of you is paying for Disney Plus, you might have encountered this warning at the beginning of some of the movies that you and I watched when we were kids, right? I just recently watched the Aristocats again with my kid. It is really troubling, right? So it has some really, really, really racist scenes, right? So we wouldn't, I didn't think of those like that, and this goes to the discussions on intrinsic racism. And but I mean, the portray of other cultures that they have, Peter Pan, I mean, It's so the gender normative roles, right, or the relationship with Native Americans, right, still a good movie, still fun to watch, right? But you have to have that conversation now, right? So Disney, so they had three choices. One was canning the movie, and they did it with one, right? So they did can Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I think was the right call. Then they had option two, which was censoring the movie, cutting it, which is really hard. In some of these movies, some of the scenes are fairly intrinsic to the plot, and you would end up with or the third one was this one, okay? Here is a warning, right? Here are things. Be ready to have this conversation and decide. Their new movies are not like that. They all are. It is what it is, right? Humans are what they are. They are the sum of knowledge. You might recognize this argument. We are resuscitating again the argument of content moderation and safe spaces and culture, right? It's coming right into AI directly. So remember again, right? So these are stochastic parrots, right? They're built on the probability of conversations. And it turns out that when you build a AI like this one, people didn't want a search engine. We already have one, too, right? So we already had search engines. We don't need a search engine to find. What people were looking for was connection, interaction, experiential activities with these systems, right? Let me tell you about one third character. And this one is going to take us down memory lane because it goes to the answer of why do people want a chat, right? After all, this is a chat box, right? This is a place to talk. It's not a place to do anything else. So you might recognize, depending on how old you are and if you've been close to computer systems or not, Elisa, right? Elisa was a very interesting case, right? Elisa was a chatbot, one probably of the first in the 1970s. And Elisa was created as a Rogerian psychotherapist, which basically you would ask it a question and it would send it back to you, right? And it was a very basic way of interacting. It didn't have all the language models that we have right now. And people loved it, right? It was freaky. But you can see already how in the 1970s, students, you have it on the text down there, I won't read it, but students were already finding ways of playing and twerking and making Elisa say things that the creator didn't want it to, right? So this idea of agency, of taking our tool and using it for what we want, it's really intrinsic to the idea of the autonomous systems that we are creating. You can tell me how many you recognize, and you will be aging you as you do it, right? But every autonomous system in our imagination, in our culture, right? From C-3PO to AL to any system, right? Comes with different values, but all of them are made to connect with the humans in the loop, right? They are not machines that produce just an output of data. They are creatures of interaction. And this is biblical, right? From the Hebrew text, you'll identify creatures like the golem, right? The golem that would be created through certain mechanisms in order to protect the Jewish people and to interact with it, right? So in many ways, the Jewish community had a much healthier relationship with the idea of automation than later on the Matrix gave us, which created all these fears about the machine coming for you. I'll blame Al and 2001, right, to starting that fear of the machine, right? But when you create a machine like large language models that can talk and interact like a human, and it does it so well because we have perfected the transformers and the generative models behind it, and then you throw the sum of human knowledge into it, you will get a result in which people will try to connect and interact and build new amazing things with these things, right? We're starting to see applications that are like nothing we've seen before. But remember that in order to have innovation, you have to have rule breaking, right? And this has been something that we've seen already. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we are encountering, right? So the argument is not new. I mean, Voltaire is said to have said, he didn't, but I don't agree with what you say, but I'll defend always your right to say it. Well, this is just one more interpretation of that. We are gonna, on the one hand, let a corporation, the government, to set values and dictate morality to a technology that will be so embedded in the way we create thinking and our knowledge, or not? We had an experience with this at the very beginning of spell checkers. If you wrote the F word, sometimes it would change it for darn or some other kind of asepticized version of it. I'm sorry, when I say F, I mean F. I don't mean darn, I don't mean frack, I mean, you know what it means, right? And I want to write that one, and I don't want any corporation to tell me what can I or cannot write. And this is kind of the debate that we're having here with these empowering technologies. Steve Jobs famously called computers bicycles for the mind, right? The same way a bicycle makes you run faster than a cheetah, right? These computers will force multiply, right? In the language of computer science, you would call it that they will augment your capabilities beyond what is naturally human, right? And that comes with the threats and challenges and that we can discuss. I've been trying to write a counter, well, I don't know if it's a counter, it's a terrorist novel as an experiment, counter-terrorism, but using ChatGPT. In its current iteration, it always ends up sounding like Gilligan Island, right? It's pathetic. The level of redirection that is baked now into the system makes it impossible. I don't know if you remember this scene from RoboCop 2, right? So it's probably the best movie to watch right now with hair in this moment. Who would have said that? In which OCP, right, the big corporation, the big mean corporation, wants to replace the program with the new RoboCop, right? So they want to kill RoboCop. And the way they do that is by baking hundreds of directives in his brain, so he becomes useless. And there's this very funny scene, what you would call it today, a woke RoboCop is unable to stop a crime. Right? So the reality is that for AIs to be able to perform duties that are surprising, are creative, and like nothing else, there is a level of agency that has to go to the user of that AI and the ownership that goes to that. So for my liberal friends in the room, I'll say, my AI, my choice, right? So, and for my conservative friends in the room, I'll say, AI don't offend people, people offends people. Right? We have heuristics, both from the left or the right, to build tolerance in this idea and to put the agency of bad behavior not on the tool, but on the hand that it's handling the tool. So let me do an experiment. If you added the polling software that is there, if not you have the QR in front of you, let me know, right? If you had a choice, right? Would you go if you had the choice, right, would you prefer to use kind of the I Love Lucy AI that will never go off the rails, it's safe, but you will not be able to do much? Would you go with the stock photo AI, right, the LinkedIn AI that works well when you're trying to write a government report within DHS, right? Or would you go with the creative AI, the one that can fall in love with you and sometimes do funky stuff, but it's also the most artistic and creative? What is your choice? Raise your hand if you would go with number one. It's gonna be public, sorry. I was trying to give you some anonymity, so. Raise your hand with number one. Raise your hand with number two. Raise your hand with number three. Yeah, I'm not surprised, right? So there's agency. There's the importance of being responsible what you're doing and tolerating it. So I'll leave it here. There's a lot unanswered. This is a very exciting moment in technology history. We don't get many of these, right? We got our kitty hug moment in December of 2022. Right, so we were busy preparing turkey and stuffing, right? And what ended up happening is that a technology took off the ground, right? And I call it a kitty hug moment because you know how far the first Wright brothers plane flew? 800 feet, right? 2,000 feet at 800 feet of altitude. It sucked. It killed people soon later, right? And nevertheless, right, it changed the world forever. These are the dumbest AIs that you'll ever interact with, right? From here, they'll just get better and better and better. And here is the deal. Many of these technologies are already being open sourced. So if we impose the guardrails on these technologies, there'll be others, right? So do we want those to be the case? And if we don't allow for certain things to happen, well, there are VPNs, and people will start connecting to Stockholm or Shanghai to use their AIs instead of our AIs, right? So what kind of great power competition policy we want to make sure, in my opinion, that the United States remains the superpower of artificial intelligence technology, because ultimately that's what we're talking about. I'll leave it there.